A millionaire was shocked when he entered a fancy restaurant and saw his ex-fiancée whom he had left 5 years ago. With a boy who looked exactly like him. Before we start the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Richard Foster, a young millionaire CEO, looked at Emily, his fiancée, with cold eyes. Trying to hide the inner he had made a tough decision. In his view, it was necessary. This isn't working. Emily. It's better if we end this here, he said. Unable to meet her gaze, Emily was stunned. The air around her seemed to vanish. Her racing heart beat erratically. You are breaking up with me after everything we've been through, she said. Through. Her voice shook. She also sounded angry. Richard took a step back, avoiding her eyes, that he knew his decision didn't come from his heart. From outside pressures, his family had never accepted Emily, saying she wasn't good enough for him. She's just an ordinary girl with no name or fortune. They had said. My family is right. Emily. We're from different worlds. This would never work. The words echoed like a death sentence in her heart. Emily, who had always taken pride in her independence, now felt vulnerable and betrayed. She knew Richard was merely repeating what his family had drilled into him. That didn't make the pain any less real. You're letting your family decide your life. She stepped forward, her teary eyes fixed on his. I thought you were stronger than this. Richard. He remained silent. Unable to reply, Emily took a deep breath. Trying to hold back her tears, she knew it was useless to plead or try to convince. We're from different worlds. My family is right. Emily. We're from different worlds. This will never work. The words echoed like a death sentence in her heart. Emily, who had always taken pride in her independence, now felt vulnerable and betrayed. She knew Richard was merely repeating what his family had drilled into him. The decision had already been made. Fine. If you think this is for the best, then go ahead, she said in a barely audible voice. Richard glanced at her one last time before leaving. Every step he took felt like a definitive farewell. As the door closed, Emily collapsed onto the sofa, letting her tears fall freely. Her modest, we're from different worlds. Emily. We're from different worlds. Her family had said that her fiancé's family was from a different world. Emily felt vulnerable and betrayed. She felt as if she were trapped. She had always been proud of her independence. Now she felt different. Her apartment felt small and suffocating. She looked at the engagement ring on her finger. She took it off. Later that night, she stared at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed beside her. It was an unexpected call from her parents. They hadn't spoken to her in years. Emily. We need to talk. Come home, her father's firm voice said. Emily hesitated. Something in the urgency of his tone made her reconsider. Perhaps it was time to face her past and just maybe find a new direction for her life. When Emily arrived at her parents' house, she paused for a few minutes before stepping inside. Taking a deep breath, the large butler opened the door and greeted her with a nod. The butler's familiarity made her think of home. She decided to stay strong. It was time to face her family and find out why they had called her. In the main hall, her parents waited for her. Her father, Charles Carter, sat in a leather armchair, his face serious, while her mother, Victoria, remained calm and composed beside him. Emily. I'm glad you came, Charles said. Breaking the silence that I thought I made it clear I wouldn't be coming back, she replied. Crossing her arms, Victoria stood and approached her daughter. Her eyes glistening with a mix of relief and concern. We know we've made mistakes in the past. Dear, but we need you now, Victoria said. Her voice gentle yet unmistakably urgent. Emily raised an eyebrow. Skeptical. Since when did her parents need her? They had always been the unshakable pillars of the Carter empire, running a vast network of companies with an iron grip. You need me for what? She asked. Her skepticism evident. Charles adjusted himself in the armchair and took a deep breath before answering. I want you to take over as president of the holding company. Shock flickered in Emily's eyes that she'd spent years trying to escape the weight of the Carter name. Now they were asking her to take on such a significant role in the company. Why me? She retorted, her voice laced with resentment. You always said I wasn't fit for the business. Because you're the only one who can do it now. Charles replied gravely. I'm getting old, Emily. Your mother and I know we can't trust anyone else with this responsibility. Why me? She repeated, her voice laced with resentment. Because you're the only one who can do it now. Charles replied gravely. As if I don't already have enough on my plate. Emily. We're from different worlds. This would never work. This would never work, she echoed, her voice laced with resentment. This would never work. She hesitated. The thought of taking on such a significant role and returning to the corporate world unsettled her. At the same time, something inside her whispered that perhaps it was time to stop running. And if I say I don't want to? She challenged, folding her arms. Then we'll keep asking until you reconsider. Victoria, he said this with a faint smile, but we know you won't let us down. Silence hung in the air for a few moments. Emily knew the decision wouldn't be easy. A part of her, still hurt by the breakup with Richard and the pressure she had endured, wanted to prove she was capable of much more than he and his family had ever imagined. Very well. We're from different worlds, Emily. This will never work. Her heart ached as she heard these words. Emily, who had always been proud of her independence, felt vulnerable and betrayed. She knew that Richard was just repeating what his family had taught him. Well, we'll do this my way, she said firmly. Charles smiled for the first time since she arrived. He knew that once Emily made a decision, no one could change her mind. In the days that followed, Emily immersed herself in the holding company's business. The numbers, the reports, the endless meetings, everything reminded her of. She knew how intense the business world could be. She was also learning how challenging and rewarding it could be. She felt like she was taking charge of her life and creating a new version of herself. Years after her breakup with Richard, Emily Carter's life had changed a lot. Now, as the president of the Carter Holding Company, she led a huge business with confidence and authority. But that evening, all she wanted was a quiet dinner with Noah, her 5-year-old son, at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Emily entered, hand in hand with Noah, who was attracting people's attention. Dressed in an elegant black dress, she looked confident. Noah, on the other hand, was full of the energy typical of a child. He was observing everything with curiosity. With his innocent smile and striking features, it was impossible to ignore how much he resembled Richard. They sat down at a table near the window, where Noah quickly started asking questions about the view of the city. Emily answered patiently, feeling grateful for those peaceful moments with her son. However, fate seemed to have other plans for the evening. As Emily sipped her wine, the door opened. Richard Foster walked in with two investors. He still had the same strong presence. He was dressed in a well-fitting suit. His expression was sharp and focused. Emily stopped moving for a moment when she saw him. She quickly became calm again. She was determined not to let his presence bother her. Richard didn't notice her at first. He was busy with his business meeting. It wasn't until the waiter guided him to a nearby table that he saw her. Emily was sitting elegantly with a glass of wine in her hand. She was with a boy who looked a lot like him. She was shocked. Richard was unable to move. His eyes moved from Emily to the boy next to her. He felt the ground shake. Emily saw the surprise and confusion on Richard's face. She remained calm. She picked up her wine glass and took a sip. Ignoring him. Richard, unable to look away, felt many emotions. He remembered when they broke up. He remembered the cold way he had left her and the harsh words he had spoken. Now he saw her there. Beautiful. Calm. With a boy who looked like him. He was troubled by something. He couldn't concentrate on the meeting with the investors. He felt more and more curious and worried with each second that passed. Who was the boy? Could he possibly be his son? The thought worried him. It made sense. Emily continued to ignore Richard, focusing her attention on Noah, who was talking about the piano. Still, she could feel his intense gaze on her. That gave her a sense of control. It was exactly how she wanted it. After several long minutes, Richard couldn't take it any longer. He excused himself from the investors and walked over to Emily's table. Trying to regain his Emily. Keep calm and carry on. She looked up, seeming surprised to see him. Richard. What a coincidence. Coincidence? He raised an eyebrow, glancing briefly at Noah, who was now curiously watching the stranger. Are you? Well. Well. Thank you. And you? She kept her tone polite, though there was a hint of irony in her words. Richard hesitated. He knew it wasn't the right time for direct questions. He couldn't help himself. He glanced at the boy again. His voice came out softer than he intended. Who is he? Emily leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Richard. This is Noah. My son. Richard felt those words hit him like a punch to the stomach. He looked at Noah again, who was now eating a piece of bread, completely unaware of the weight of the conversation. Your son, he repeated, amazed. Yes. My son, Emily confirmed firmly. Richard's mind raced. The boy was. It had been 5 years since he and Emily had broken up. The dates matched. He looked just like her. He started to say something. She interrupted him. Not here. Richard. This isn't the place for that kind of conversation. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Inside him, Emily was right. The restaurant wasn't a place for confrontations or difficult questions. We need to talk, he said. His voice calmer now. Still urgent. Perhaps, Emily replied, lifting her chin slightly. But on my terms. Not yours. Richard knew he had no choice. Emily was clearly in control. He couldn't force anything here. Fine. I'll be waiting, he said before stepping away and returning to his table, though his thoughts were consumed by the revelation he had just received. Meanwhile, Emily watched Richard from the corner of her eye. She knew the encounter had unsettled him. She had waited for this moment her whole life. Now that it had arrived, she felt strangely calm. Noah, not noticing the tension in the air, took Emily's hand and smiled. "Mommy, can I play the piano?" She smiled back and stroked his hair. "Of course. My love." As Noah ran toward the piano, Emily took a deep breath. The fight with Richard had just begun. She was ready to face whatever was coming. Richard Foster couldn't sleep that night. Emily's words kept repeating in his mind. The image of Noah, who looked so much like him, wouldn't leave him alone. The idea that the boy might be his son consumed him. He knew he had to do something. He had to be careful. Emily was not the simple young woman he thought she was. She was now a powerful businesswoman. Richard needed to be sure before talking to her again. The next morning, Richard called his trusted team together. "I need detailed information on Emily Carter," he declared, his tone leaving no room for questions. "I want to know everything that's happened to her over the past 5 years." His assistants quickly got to work. Within hours, reports began to arrive. Richard reviewed the documents carefully, each page revealing a new facet of Emily's life. Not only had she was the president of the Carter Holding Company. She had also led impressive business expansions. Under her leadership, the company had flourished, solidifying its position as one of the largest in the country. Among the reports, something caught his attention: medical and travel records. In the months following their breakup, Emily had secretly visited a private clinic. Richard frowned. Intrigued, ordered his team to dig deeper. By early afternoon, one of his assistants returned with additional information: "Mr. Foster, it seems Emily visited the clinic for prenatal care. The dates coincide with the time when you were still together." The assistant said he gave over more documents. Richard felt the weight of confirmation. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process everything. Noah wasn't just similar to him, everything pointed to the boy being his son. Richard decided not to waste any more time. He visited the clinic for more answers. He used his influence to gain access to Emily's medical records. The final confirmation came in the form of a DNA test attached to the file. The result was undeniable: Noah Smith was his biological son. The initial shock gave way to a wave of guilt and regret. Richard recalled the day he ended things with Emily. He remembered how he judged her for living a simple life and for the pressure from his family. He realized that by giving in to their manipulation, he had not only lost Emily but also missed the first years of his son's life. What troubled him most was the question: why hadn't Emily ever told him the truth? Richard was determined to confront her. He called his secretary and scheduled an urgent meeting with Emily under the pretext of discussing business. When he arrived at the Carter Holding Company's boardroom, he was greeted by Emily herself, who seemed to already know the reason for his visit. "Richard, I didn't expect to see you again so soon," she said, her tone composed. "We need to talk. You know it's not about business," he said bluntly. Emily remained silent for a few seconds before motioning for him to sit. She closed the door, crossed her arms, waited for him to start. "Noah is my son, isn't he?" Richard asked. Cutting straight to the point, Emily showed no surprise. She knew he would find out the truth eventually. "Yes, he is," she replied firmly. Richard felt a punch to the gut when he heard this. He felt his breath catch for a moment. He quickly composed himself. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice expressing pain and frustration. I had the right. Richard called his secretary and scheduled an urgent meeting with Emily under the pretext of discussing business. When he arrived at the Carter Holden Company's boardroom, he was greeted by Emily herself, who seemed to already know the reason for his visit. Richard, I didn't expect to see you again so soon, she said. Her tone was composed. To know Emily. Did you? She retorted with a bitter laugh. After the way you left me. After abandoning me because your precious family decided I wasn't good enough for you. Richard opened his mouth to respond. The words stuck in his throat. He knew Emily was right. I did what I thought was right at the time, he admitted. Richard lowered his eyes. Emily took a deep breath, trying not to cry. I chose to raise Noah on my own because I knew that if I relied on you or your family, they'd just use him. I wasn't going to let that happen to my son. Richard felt the weight of her words. Lowering his gaze, he took a deep breath. But I was wrong. I chose to raise Noah on my own because I knew that if I relied on you or your family, they'd just use him. I wasn't going to let that happen to my son. Emily took a deep breath, trying not to cry. Richard, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. She had never thought about how her family's influence might have made Emily keep him away. I want to be part of his life, Richard said, his voice strong. I want to make up for lost time. Emily said. She looked at him for a moment, searching his eyes for sincerity. Being part of Noah's life isn't that simple, Richard said. You'll have to prove that you've changed, that you're no longer the weak man who let himself be manipulated, and I will prove it. He promised. Emily knew this was just the first of many difficult conversations they would have, while she was willing to give Richard a chance to redeem himself. She was equally determined to protect Noah from. Richard called his secretary and scheduled a meeting with Emily. He told her that it was urgent and that it was about business. When he arrived at the Carter Holden Company's boardroom, Emily greeted him. She seemed to already know why he was there. Richard, I didn't expect to see you again so soon, she said. Her tone was composed. Any negative influences? After the revelation, Richard spent most of the night alone in his office, lost in thought. He was still haunted by the confirmation that Noah was his son. What troubled him more was Emily's coldness. Though he understood the reason for her resentment, he knew regaining her trust would be challenging. Richard decided to take the first step toward building a connection with Noah. The next morning, he called Emily. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. It was the same result. It wouldn't be easy. Determined not to give up, he sent a short but direct message. I want to see Noah. Tell me when and where. Emily read the message while having coffee on her balcony. She knew Richard wouldn't back down. Deep down, she also understood that sooner or later, she would have to let him meet their son. Sighing, she replied, tomorrow at 2 p.m. in Central Park. Come alone. The next day, Richard arrived at the park a few minutes early. He wore casual clothes, a rare sight for him. He wanted to make a good impression from a distance. He saw Emily sitting on a bench while Noah played on the nearby grass. Richard's heart raced as he watched the boy. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what his life might have been like had he known about his son from. He was wearing casual clothes, which was unusual for him. He wanted to make a good impression. From a distance, he saw Emily sitting on a bench while Noah played on the nearby grass. Richard's heart raced as he watched the boy. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what his life might have been like had he known about his son from the start. "You're late," Emily said as he approached. Though she knew it wasn't true. "I got here early. I didn't want to interrupt," he replied, trying to keep his tone light. Emily looked at him for a moment, as if assessing his sincerity, before calling out to Noah. "Noah! Come here. Sweetheart." The boy ran over to his mother. Noah was late. Emily didn't say anything. She knew it wasn't true. "I got here early. I didn't want to interrupt," he replied, trying to sound light-hearted. Emily looked at him for a moment, as if she was thinking about whether he was being serious. Then she called out to Noah. "Noah! Come here. Sweetheart," she said. The boy ran over to his mother, his face glowing with the innocent smile of a child. He stopped beside Emily, holding her hand. Looked at Richard with curiosity. "This is Richard," Emily said calmly. "He wants to meet you." Noah frowned for a moment before giving a shy smile. "Hi, Richard," he said. Richard crouched to the boy's level, feeling a wave of emotion and hearing Noah's voice. Noah was happy and excited. He stopped beside Emily, holding her hand. Looked at Richard with curiosity. "This is Richard," Emily said calmly. "He wants to meet you." Noah frowned for a moment before giving a shy smile. "Hi, Richard," he said. Richard crouched to the boy's level, feeling a wave of emotion and hearing Noah's voice. "It's a pleasure to meet you," the boy said, giggling softly. He was clearly more interested in going back to playing. "Do you want to play with me?" Noah asked, holding up a colorful ball. "Sure," the boy said. As they played, Emily watched from a distance. Her emotions conflicted. Seeing Richard with Noah felt strange. She couldn't deny there was something natural about their connection. Noah seemed comfortable. For the first time, Richard appeared less rigid, almost human. After an hour, Noah ran back to Emily. "Tired but happy, Mommy. He's really good at playing ball," the boy said excitedly. Emily smiled and ruffled his hair. "I'm glad you had fun, sweetheart." Richard walked over, taking a deep breath. He knew the moment couldn't last forever. There was something important he needed to say. "Emily, thank you for letting me meet him. It means more to me than you know." She looked at him, her expression serious. "Richard, let me make one thing clear, just because I let you see Noah today, that doesn't mean everything is resolved. You still have a lot to prove. I know," he said firmly. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I hope so." "I won't tolerate empty promises," she replied, taking Noah's hand. "Come on, sweetheart. It's time to go home." As Richard watched Emily and Noah walk away, he felt a mix of hope and determination. He knew the road ahead would be long. He was resolved to win back not only Emily, also his right to be Noah's father. Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand. Now let's continue reading the story. After meeting in the park, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Noah and Emily. He felt like he had missed crucial years of his son's life. He knew he needed to understand what had happened during that time. Determined to fill in the gaps, he hired a private investigator to delve into the years when Emily had vanished from his life. 2 days later, The investigator handed over a detailed report filled with information that left Richard both intrigued and at times stunned. Emily had faced significant challenges. Especially in choosing to raise Noah on her own, the report revealed frequent visits to medical clinics during her pregnancy and pediatric hospitals in Noah's early years. The boy had apparently suffered respiratory complications shortly after birth, but Emily, with resilience, had overcome it all without seeking any support. Richard couldn't help but blame himself, while he had been living comfortably in for the first time. He said, "Hi, Noah. It's a pleasure to meet you." The boy giggled softly, clearly more interested in going back to playing. "Do you want to play with me?" Noah asked, holding up a colorful ball. Richard smiled. "Sure. Let's play." As they played, Emily watched from a distance. Her emotions conflicted. Seeing Richard with Noah felt. Emily had faced the hardships of motherhood alone. More than ever, he felt the need to make things right. The next morning, Richard arrived at the Carter Holding Company building unannounced. He knew Emily would receive him cautiously. He could no longer delay the conversation. Upon entering the reception area, he was met with wary looks from the employees who clearly recognized him. "Mr. Foster. Ms. Carter is in a meeting. She'll see me. Just let her know I'm here," the receptionist informed him nervously. A few minutes later, Emily's office door opened. She was as elegant as ever. Her expression showed irritation. "Noah. I'm here to play with you," the boy said, holding up a colorful ball. "Noah. I'm here to play with you, too," Richard smiled. "Richard. Sure. Let's play," Noah asked. "Noah. I want to play with you," Emily said, watching from a distance. "I want to understand what really happened." Emily said, "I've read the reports. I know what you went through. I know I was a coward for leaving you that day. But I need to hear it from you." "Not," the boy said. "Noah. It's a pleasure to meet you," the boy said, giggling softly. "Noah. It's a pleasure to meet you, too," the boy said, holding up a colorful ball. "Richard. What do you want?" she asked. Crossing her arms that he stepped into the office without being invited and closed the door behind him. "That I want to understand what really happened, Emily. I've read the reports. That I know what you went through. I know I was a coward for leaving you that day, but I need to hear it from you. Not from documents." Emily sighed, clearly annoyed. Motioned for him to sit. After a few moments of silence, she began. "When you left me, Richard, my priority was to protect Noah. I knew your family would try to control him if they found out about his existence. I didn't want him to be used as a pawn in their power games." She paused. "I looked out the window before continuing. I decided to go it alone because it was what was best for him. My father tried to convince me to tell you everything. I didn't trust that you could stand up to your family for us. I didn't want to rely on someone who abandoned me so easily." Her words cut deep. Richard knew he deserved every one of them. Your Richard looked out the window, thinking. He decided to go it alone because it was what was best for Noah. My father tried to convince me to tell you everything. I didn't trust that you could stand up to your family for us. I didn't want to rely on someone who abandoned me so easily. Her words cut deep. Richard knew he deserved every one of them. You're right. I was weak. I admit that. But things have changed. Emily. I've changed. I want to be there not just as a father. To truly support both of you. Emily studied him, gauging his sincerity. Despite all the pain, she could see that something in Richard had shifted. But trusting him again was a different matter. Words are easy. Richard. I won't risk Noah's well-being. I won't risk Noah's well-being for empty promises. If you want to be part of his life, you'll have to prove it. Not just to me. To him, and I will, Richard said firmly. Emily leaned back in her chair. Thoughtful, there was something in her expression that Richard couldn't quite read. Noah is a brilliant child. He's sensitive. If you come into his life. If you come into his life and then leave, it could break him. I won't let that happen. Richard nodded. That I understand, and I give you my word, I'm not going anywhere. After a long silence, Emily finally changed the subject. There's something you need to know. After you left, my mother tried to intervene. She thought she should tell your family about Noah. That I stopped her. That I don't know if they know. If they do, it could make things even more complicated. Richard frowned. The idea that his family might know about Noah and had done nothing disturbed him. He also knew how manipulative they could be. Whatever they know, it doesn't matter. I'll protect Noah from any influence they might try to exert, he assured her. Emily still seemed skeptical. There was something in Richard's eyes that made her believe he was being honest. I hope you keep that promise, Richard. If you don't, I won't have any mercy on you, she said coldly. Richard nodded, rising from his chair. You'll see I mean it, Emily. He left Emily's office feeling determined. Emily's words lingered in his mind. He understood that to regain her trust and his place in Noah's life, he'd have to face his past and prove he was ready to be the father and partner they deserved. After leaving Emily's office, Richard knew he couldn't waste any time. Earning her trust was only. Richard told Emily about Noah. He knew that Emily might tell Noah's family about him. This could make things more complicated. Richard was worried about his family. They could be manipulative. But he also knew that they didn't know much. Richard knew that he needed to build a connection with Noah. It was clear that Noah was curious but cautious around strangers. This meant that every interaction would have to be carefully and thoughtfully crafted. The next day, Richard reached out to Emily again. He suggested a more relaxed outing where he could spend more time with her. With his son. After some hesitation, she agreed. Made it clear that this didn't mean he would have a permanent role in Noah's life. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the zoo, Emily said. Noah loves animals. It's a place where he can feel comfortable. Richard agreed without hesitation that he knew that every moment was an opportunity to strengthen his bond with his son. The following morning, Richard arrived at the zoo on time. He wore casual clothes and carried a cap to shield himself from the sun. An unusual sight for someone used to boardrooms. When he saw Emily and Noah at the entrance, he felt nervous and hopeful. Noah was excited, holding a zoo map and talking non-stop. Stop about the animals. He wanted to see them. When he saw Richard approaching, the boy waved shyly but with a genuine smile. You came, Noah said enthusiastically. Of course I did, Richard replied, kneeling to the boy's level. I wouldn't miss the chance to see all these animals with you. Emily watched the interaction from a distance, remaining vigilant. As much as she wanted Noah to have a positive relationship with Richard, caution was still necessary. Her greatest ally. The trio began their tour at the big cat habitats. Noah was fascinated by the lions and tigers. Richard seized every opportunity to interact with him, sharing interesting facts about the animals. Gradually, the tension between them eased. Noah started feeling more at ease. Look at that lion. He really looks like the king of the jungle. Doesn't he? Richard Noah asked. His eyes sparkling. Exactly, Noah. They're called. I stopped her. I don't know if they know. If they do, it could make things more complicated. Richard frowned. The idea that his family might know about Noah and had done nothing upset him. He also knew how manipulative they could be. Whatever they know doesn't matter. I'll protect Noah from the kings of the jungle because they're strong and brave. Richard replied, smiling. Noah dashed off to the next area, where the elephants were. Richard and Emily followed, keeping a slow pace. He's amazing, Emily said sincerely. Thank you for letting me spend this time with him. He means everything to me. I just hope you understand the responsibility that comes with this. I understand. I told your family about Noah. I stopped her. I don't know if they know. If they do, it could make things even more complicated. Richard frowned. The idea that his family might know about Noah and had done nothing disturbed him. He also knew how manipulative they could be. Whatever they know doesn't matter. I'll protect Noah from more than ever. Richard assured her. After hours of exploring the zoo, they stopped in a picnic area. Emily had brought snacks for Noah. Richard took the opportunity to sit next to the boy. Noah, what's been your favorite animal so far? Richard asked, trying to start a more personal conversation. The tigers. They're so fast and strong. I want to be like them when I grow up. Noah, laughing, and you will be. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. Too, Richard said. Emily watched Noah closely as he ate. Richard tried to interact with Noah. It wasn't easy. Noah seemed to be acting naturally, which made Emily wonder if he had really changed. After they ate, Noah wanted to see the penguins before leaving. Richard took his hand. The two walked to the cold habitat. Emily followed closely, watching how Noah talked to Richard as if they'd known each other for years. The penguins are so funny, Noah exclaimed, laughing as he watched them slide on the ice. Richard laughed along, feeling more connected to his son with each passing moment. At the end of the visit, Emily called Noah aside, preparing to say goodbye to Richard. Today was fun, Mom, Noah said excitedly. Richard knows a lot about animals. It was a good. Emily nodded, her gaze shifting to Richard. Richard laughed along, feeling more connected to his son with each passing moment. At the end of the visit, Emily called Noah aside, preparing to say goodbye to Richard. Today was fun, Mom. Richard knows a lot about animals, Noah said excitedly. It was a good day, Emily nodded, her gaze shifting to Richard. But as I said before, this is just the beginning. Richard smiled, sensing a small victory. I know, Emily. I'll keep proving I'm here to stay. Before parting, Noah unexpectedly hugged Richard. See you soon, Richard. I hope you come back to see more animals with me, Noah said. Richard was surprised but gently. He returned the hug, touched by the boy's spontaneity. I'll definitely come back, Noah said. I promise. Back in his car, Richard felt more determined than ever. He knew building a relationship with Noah and regaining Emily's trust would take time. The day at the zoo had been an important step. The days following their zoo visit. The days were calm. But Richard knew the peace wouldn't last. He was working to strengthen his bond with Noah and rebuild Emily's trust when something unexpected emerged to complicate matters. A rival from the past had returned. Victor Hale. A former suitor of Emily and one of Richard's. After the zoo. Things were calm. Richard knew that wouldn't last. He was working to become closer to Noah and rebuild Emily's trust when something unexpected happened. A rival from the past returned, Victor Hale. He had tried to win Emily's heart years ago. He and Richard were direct competitors in business. Emily had rejected him without hesitation. That rejection had made him feel angry and jealous. Now, he saw an opportunity for revenge. When he learned about the renewed connection between Emily and Richard, Victor decided to act. He attended a gala event hosted by the Carter Holden Company. As the hostess, Emily couldn't avoid crossing paths with him. He approached her with a perfectly rehearsed smile and said, "Emily, it's always a pleasure to see you." His voice was dripping with false cordiality. After the zoo, things were calm. Richard knew that wouldn't last. He was working to become closer to Noah and trust Emily again. Then something unexpected happened. A man from the past came back. Victor Hale. He had tried to date Emily in the past. He was also one of Richard's. Emily replied. Her tone neutral. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. I couldn't miss the chance to congratulate you on the success of the holding company. You've truly been a force in business." He complimented her before adding. "And of course, I've heard that you and Richard Foster have been spending a lot of time together." Emily kept her composure. Her gaze hardened slightly. "What happens between me and Richard is none of your business." "Oh. I understand," Victor said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But you know how rumors are. I just found it." It was interesting that he came back after all these years. Emily knew Victor was fishing for information. She wasn't about to give him anything. "I have other matters to attend to," Victor said. "Have a good evening," she said, walking away without waiting for a response. Victor wasn't one to give up easily. The next day, he contacted a tabloid journalist, providing vague and speculative information about Emily and Richard's relationship, as well as the existence of Noah. The story quickly spread, creating a media frenzy. Richard got the news while in a meeting with his team. His expression hardened as he read, "After the zoo. Things were calm." Richard knew that wouldn't last. He was working to strengthen his bond with Noah and rebuild Emily's trust when something unexpected happened. A rival from the past had returned. His name was Victor Hale. He had previously tried to date Emily. He was one of Richard's. The headline, "Billionaire Heiress and Millionaire CEO, The Secret Connection and Hidden Son." He immediately called Emily, who answered with a tense voice. "Have you seen the news?" Richard asked. "Of course I have. And I have a pretty good idea who's behind it," she replied, clearly irritated. "Victor. Richard." After the zoo, things were calm. Richard knew that wouldn't last. He was working to become closer to Noah and regain Emily's trust when something unexpected happened. A man from their past returned. His name was Victor Hale. He had tried to date Emily in the past. He was also one of Richard's. "Exactly," Emily said. "He's always been obsessed with controlling me. Now he's using Noah and you to draw attention." "Emily," Richard said, trying to stay calm. "This can't go on. I won't allow Noah to be exposed like this." "Neither will I," she agreed. "I'm already taking legal action to contain the damage." "What about Victor?" Richard asked. His tone was cold and determined. "Leave him to me. I know how to handle people like Victor. Emily replied. Her voice was confident. While Emily consulted her lawyers, Richard decided to confront Victor directly. He knew his rival was calculating and manipulative. He couldn't stand by while his family's integrity was under attack. Richard found Victor at an exclusive business club, a place where the man often flaunted his influence. When Victor saw him, he raised his wine glass. After the zoo, things were calm. Richard knew that wouldn't last. He was working to become closer to Noah and to regain Emily's trust when something unexpected happened. A man from the past came back. He was a rival of Richard and Emily's. His name was Victor Hale. What a surprise! Victor said, mocking Richard. What brings you here? Let's not pretend, Victor said, smiling cynically. We both know you're behind that sensationalist article. I'm not, Richard said bluntly. I simply shared some interesting tidbits. I can't help it if people love a good story. Richard stepped closer, his tone calm but laced with threat. If you think you can use Emily or Noah to boost your own image, you're wrong. I won't let you keep playing this game. Interesting to hear that from you, Victor replied, sounding angry. After all, you're the one who left Emily alone in the first place. Maybe I'm just finishing what you started. The mention of the breakup made Richard feel guilty. He refused to let it show. The difference between us, Victor continued, is you're wrong. I won't let you continue this game. Interesting to hear that from you. After all, you're the one who abandoned Emily in the first place. Maybe I'm just finishing what you started. The mention of the breakup stirred the guilt Richard had been trying to overcome. He refused to let it show. The difference between us, Victor, is that I acknowledge my mistakes and I'm working to fix them. You, on the other hand, only know how to destroy. Victor chuckled, clearly enjoying the confrontation. Good luck with that, Richard. But remember, in business, hesitation means losing. Richard left the club with a mix of frustration and determination. He knew Victor wouldn't give up easily. He was ready to face him head-on. Meanwhile, Emily found an unexpected solution to handle Noah's exposure, instead of trying to shield him further. She chose to confront the situation with transparency. In an exclusive interview with a renowned journalist, she carefully shared her story, introducing Noah to the public as a loved and protected child. My priority has always been to protect. Meanwhile, Emily found an unexpected solution to the problem of Noah's exposure. Instead of trying to shield him further, she chose to confront the situation with transparency. In an exclusive interview with a renowned journalist, she carefully shared her story, introducing Noah to the public as a loved and protected child. My priority has always been to protect my son, Emily stated firmly. But I also want him to grow up knowing there's nothing to be ashamed of. He is my greatest achievement. The interview was met with support and admiration from the public, shifting the narrative around the story. Victor, frustrated that his strategy had failed, retreated temporarily. But both Richard and Emily knew he remained. He was a threat. He didn't know about it after Emily's interview. Things seemed to finally get better. The positive media response helped ease criticisms. The public supported her decision to protect Noah. But then, something unexpected happened. A powerful international group wanted to buy a big share of the Carter holding company. It was a great offer, promising to do business in new markets, but there was a problem. The group wanted to be in charge of the company. which would mean that they could control the company's decisions. Emily felt confused and worried. On one hand, the offer meant that the company could grow and do more things. On the other hand, it meant that someone else would be in charge. A source of financial security for a period of time. On the other hand, she knew that accepting it would mean giving up part of the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. That night, as she reviewed the contract details in her office, she heard light footsteps looking toward the door. She saw Noah clutching his favorite blanket. "Mommy, why are you still awake?" he asked. Rubbing his eyes, Emily smiled and he asked her to sit on his lap. "I'm working. Sweetheart. I have some important decisions to make for the company." "Is it hard?" Noah asked, his voice full of curiosity. Emily sighed, gently stroking his hair. "Sometimes we have to make choices that affect a lot of people. That's not always easy." Noah was quiet for a moment before asking, "Can Richard help?" The Emily was surprised when she heard Richard's name. She knew Noah was starting to like him. She wasn't sure if he would be a good person for them to have in their lives. "Maybe I need to make some decisions on my own," Emily thought. Noah hugged her. Emily felt the strength of that small gesture. Everything she did was for him. A hidden threat. After Emily's interview, things finally seemed to calm down. The positive media response helped ease criticisms. The public supported her decision to protect Noah. But then, Emily received an unexpected proposal. A powerful international group wanted to buy a decision she made that put Noah first. The next day, Emily called Richard and asked him to come to her office. When he arrived, he found her at her desk with documents. "What's going on?" he asked, noticing her worried expression. "I received a proposal from an international group to buy part of the holding," Emily explained. "It's an incredible opportunity. But it could compromise our autonomy. I need your opinion." Richard sat across from her and began reviewing the papers she handed him. After a few minutes of silence, he finally spoke. "It's an impressive offer. I don't think it's worth it. Partial control means you'll have to answer to them on strategic decisions. That could weaken your position in the long run." Emily nodded her agreement. She had anticipated this analysis. She still wanted to hear his perspective. "I agree," she said. "But the expansion they're promising could ensure Noah's future security. That's what's dividing me." Richard looked at her seriously. "Emily, you built this holding company with your determination. You don't need an external group to secure Noah's future. He already has everything he needs." A hidden danger. After Emily's interview, things finally seemed to calm down. The positive media response helped ease criticisms. The public supported her decision to protect Noah, which made Emily feel better. But in the middle of this calm, Emily received an unexpected proposal. A powerful international group wanted to buy a Richard's words touched Emily. She was still worried about the decision. "Even so, I can't ignore how this proposal could affect things." Richard leaned forward and looked at Emily. "You're not alone. You don't have to carry the whole burden by yourself. I'm here for you and for Noah." Emily felt many emotions. A hidden danger. After Emily's interview, things finally seemed to calm down. The positive media response helped ease criticisms. The public supported her decision to protect Noah. Then, something unexpected happened. A powerful international group wanted to buy a Richard's words were very honest. Emily still had trouble trusting him. Later that day, Emily decided to talk to the holdings board. During the meeting, she talked about the good and bad parts of the offer. She wanted to hear different opinions before making the final decision. People had different opinions. Most wanted to accept the offer. Emily said that the company would make money and grow if they took her suggestion. She was still careful. After she heard all the ideas, she thanked everyone and ended the meeting. She said she would make her decision soon. Meanwhile, Victor Hale was watching from far away. He was waiting for the perfect time to get involved. He had heard rumors about the idea. He knew that if he could make Emily doubt herself, he could have more power. Victor started secretly making the board members doubt that Emily was a good leader. He told them that it could be dangerous if she said no to the idea. He knew that one mistake was all it took. It would take time for his influence to grow. That evening, Emily went home worried. After putting Noah to bed, she sat on the balcony, looking at the city lights. She tried to organize her thoughts. Then her phone rang. It was Richard. "Emily, I've been thinking about something that could help," he said directly. "What if you explore a third option? Something that allows expansion without giving up control." "How exactly?" she asked. Intrigued. "You could form a strategic partnership instead of selling part of the holding. This way, you maintain control while still accessing new markets. We can revise the terms and present a counteroffer." Emily didn't say anything for a few moments, thinking about the idea. It was risky. It made sense. "It's an interesting approach," she admitted. "But it will be difficult to convince the board." "Leave that to me," he said. "I'll help you make something that will convince them. Together, we can turn the tables." Even though she was still hesitant, Emily felt there was a chance to find a balance. Over the following days, Richard and Emily worked tirelessly on the new proposal. Richard used his knowledge of the company to help her make a solid plan, while Emily prepared a speech to present to the board. By the time the meeting day arrived, she was ready. During her presentation, Emily outlined the new strategy in detail, explained how the partnership would keep the holding independent while trying new markets. The board listened closely. When she finished, Emily waited quietly as they talked. Finally, the board's chairman stood up. "Ms. Carter, your idea is good and new. We agree to go with your plan to work together." Emily felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The first time in weeks, she felt in control again. After the meeting, Richard met her in the hallway. "Congratulations, Emily. You did it." "We did it," she corrected, smiling a little, even though the board was on her side. "Emily, the battle was not over." Victor Hale was still determined to undermine her leadership. Emily decided to act before he could cause further harm after hearing rumors that he was planning a new move. Meanwhile, Richard intensified his efforts to prove his commitment to the family. He knew that earning Emily's trust and securing a permanent place in Noah's life depended on concrete actions, not just words. That morning, Emily woke up determined to protect everything she had built. She called a meeting with her lawyer and trusted team. During the meeting, they discussed ways to strengthen the legal structure of the holding company protects its assets from outside interference, especially from Victor. "We need to review all existing contracts and make sure there are no legal problems that can be exploited," Emily said firmly. Her lawyer, an experienced and careful man, nodded. "We've already started the review. We'll work harder. Any attempts to sabotage us will be stopped." Emily felt a little better. Knew she couldn't trust only legal actions. Victor was smart and knew how to attack from different sides. Meanwhile, Richard had his own plans. Determined to face his family, he arranged a meeting with his father, Robert Foster, the man who had pressured him most to abandon Emily in the past. The relationship between father and son had always been tense. Now Richard was ready to face the controlling man. In the grand office of the Foster mansion, Robert sat behind a massive wooden desk when Richard entered. The atmosphere was heavy. The walls, adorned with portraits of past generations, seemed to watch every move. "Richard, what brings you here?" Robert asked without looking up from the report he held. "I want to talk about Emily and Noah," Richard replied, getting straight to the point. Robert raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Kept his tone was controlled. "Why should that concern me? You influenced me. I made the worst decision of my life. Now I'm trying to fix it," Richard said, his voice steady. "You drove me away from the woman I loved and from my son." Robert remained silent for a moment before leaning back in his chair. He's always. Richard knew that certain choices had to be made for the sake of the legacy. "Richard, emotions are irrelevant in the world we live in. That's what you believe." "It's not what I want for my life," Richard retorted. "I won't let you or anyone else interfere again." Robert let out a low chuckle. There was a trace of disdain in his tone. Richard asked, "What do you plan to do?" "Robert?" Robert replied, "I'm going to protect my family. I'll make sure that Noah never grows up under the weight of your expectations or manipulations." Richard replied, "You still bear the Foster name." "That's exactly why I'm here. The Foster name means nothing if it isn't built on respect and values." The conversation ended in a stalemate. Richard left the office feeling lighter. Richard had finally confronted the man who had controlled much of his life. Now he was ready to move forward. In the days that followed, he dedicated himself even more to creating meaningful moments with Noah. He took him to the planetarium, taught him how to ride a bike, even spent entire afternoons helping him complete a massive puzzle. Every smile from Noah made Richard feel more connected. Emily, watching from a distance, couldn't deny there was something genuine about Richard's transformation. One evening, after putting Noah to bed, Emily found Richard in the kitchen making a cup of tea. She walked in, crossing her arms. "You're doing well with Noah," she said bluntly. Richard smiled, clearly surprised by the compliment. "He's an amazing kid. Spending time with him is the best part of my day." Emily was silent for a moment before adding, "But that doesn't mean I fully trust you." Richard nodded, understanding. "I don't expect you to trust me right away, Emily. I'm willing to keep showing that I can be trusted." His voice was clear when he said this. A moment. Emily felt less closed off. Meanwhile, Victor was getting ready to do something. He planned a private dinner with important people from the Carter Holding Company. He wanted them to believe that Emily couldn't deal with the growing problems in the international market. Victor didn't expect Emily to be one step ahead. She used information Emily gathered her team and discovered the meeting. She decided to act. With Richard's help, she called an emergency board meeting for the following day. During the meeting, Emily explained the strategies she was using to expand the holding, showing concrete results and detailed plans. Her presentation was so compelling that it left no room for doubt. By the end, Victor tried to intervene. "With all due respect, Ms. Carter, Your ideas are ambitious. With Richard's help, Emily called an emergency board meeting for the following day. During the meeting, she explained her plans to expand the company and presented the results and detailed plans she had already achieved. Her presentation was so compelling that it left no room for doubt. By the end, Victor tried to intervene. With all due respect, Ms. Carter, your ideas are ambitious. I question whether they're practical given the risks we face. Emily remained calm and responded with a controlled smile. Victor, I understand your concern. I won't allow unfounded doubts to hinder this company's progress. The board trusts me. Our results speak for themselves. The board's support was unanimous. Victor saw his influence slip through his fingers. After the meeting, Richard met Emily in the parking lot. You were brilliant in there, he said. Impressed. Thank you. Emily gathered her team and discovered the meeting. She decided to act. With Richard's help, he suggested a more assertive approach. Emily called an emergency board meeting for the following day. During the meeting, Emily outlined the strategies she was implementing to expand the holding. She presented concrete results and detailed plans. Her presentation was so compelling that it left no room for doubt. By the end, Victor tried to intervene. With all due respect, Ms. Carter, your ideas are ambitious. Emily replied. Exhausted but satisfied. Victor won't give up easily. You've shown that no one will take you down without a fight. Emily smiled, feeling stronger than ever. I've learned from the best, she said. Looking at Richard. The days following their victory over Victor Hale brought an unexpected calm for Emily and Richard. Despite the recent turmoil, both felt they were finally making progress. However, rebuilding trust wasn't something that could be rushed. And both Emily and Richard she gathered her team and discovered the meeting. She decided to act. With Richard's help, she called an emergency board meeting for the following day. During the meeting, Emily outlined the strategies she was implementing to expand the holding. Presenting concrete results and detailed plans. Her presentation was so compelling that it left no room for doubt. By the end, Victor tried to intervene. With all due respect, Ms. Carter, your ideas are ambitious. Emily knew the process would be gradual, filled with challenges and moments of vulnerability. The morning after the board meeting, Emily decided to take the day off to spend time with Noah. She wanted to make up for the time she had spent preoccupied with the holding's tensions and Victor's constant threats. When Richard called to check in on them, Emily surprised herself by inviting him to join them for a trip to the park. Let's play a little game for those who only read the comments. Type Coca gathered by her team. She discovered the meeting and decided to act. With Richard's help, who suggested a more assertive approach. Emily called an emergency board meeting for the following day. During the meeting, Emily outlined the strategies she was implementing to expand the holding. Presenting concrete results and detailed plans. Her presentation was so compelling that it left no room for doubt. By the end, Victor tried to intervene. Ms. Carter, your ideas are ambitious. Cola in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand. Now, let's continue the story. When they arrived, Noah ran to the playground while Emily and Richard sat on a nearby bench. The atmosphere was light. There was still something unresolved between them. Richard seized the opportunity to break. Emily gathered her team and found the meeting. She decided to act. With Richard's help, He suggested a more assertive approach. Emily called an emergency board meeting for the following day. During the meeting, she outlined the strategies she was implementing to expand the holding. She presented concrete results and detailed plans. Her presentation was so compelling that it left no room for doubt. By the end, Victor tried to intervene. With all due respect, Ms. Carter, your ideas are ambitious. The silence. Emily, I know things are still fragile between us. I want to thank you for giving me the chance to be here. I won't let you or Noah down. Emily looked at him, considering his words. She recognized Richard's genuine effort. She also knew the barrier between them ran deeper than the recent events. She gathered her team and found the meeting. She decided to act. With Richard's help, she called an emergency board meeting for the following day. During the meeting, she explained the strategies she was implementing to expand the holding. She presented the results and detailed plans. Her presentation was so compelling that it left no room for doubt. By the end, Victor tried to intervene. Trying. Richard and I see that, she replied softly. Trust takes time. Especially after everything that's happened. Richard nodded. Understanding. Before he could respond, Noah ran back to them, holding a small flower he had found on the grass. Look what I found, he exclaimed. His face lit up with joy. Emily laughed. With Richard's help, Emily called an emergency board meeting for the following day. During the meeting, she explained her plans to expand the company and presented the results and detailed plans she had already made. Her presentation was so good that everyone was sure she would be successful. By the end of the meeting, Victor tried to stop her. With all due respect, Ms. Carter, your ideas are ambitious. Taking the flower from her son and kissing his forehead, Emily remembered why she had fought so hard to protect Noah. After the outing, Richard felt it was the right time to be serious with Emily about a secret he had kept for years. He knew that to truly regain her trust, he needed to be completely honest. That evening, he sent Emily a message asking her to meet him somewhere neutral. They agreed on the same restaurant where they had first reunited. When Emily arrived, Richard was already waiting. His serious expression showed that this would be an important conversation. Thank you for coming, he began, visibly nervous. There's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago. Emily crossed her arms, her posture signaling she was ready to listen but cautious that I'm listening. Richard took a deep breath before beginning. When we broke up, my family not only pressured me to leave you, also did something I only discovered recently. My father hired an investigator to follow you and find anything that could threaten our family's legacy. Emily didn't say anything. Her expression became serious. What was he looking for? She asked, her voice low but firm. Anything that could make you look bad or justify the breakup, Richard admitted regretfully, but the worst part is that they used what they found to manipulate me even more. I recently learned that they knew about Noah long before I did. The revelation hit Emily like a punch. She stood up, furious. Are you telling me your family knew about Noah from the beginning, that they monitored me, manipulated you? You never realized it? The pain in her voice was unmistakable. Richard stood as well, trying to calm her. I didn't know, Emily. If I had, I would have done something, but now that I do, I'm trying to make it right. My father will have no more influence over me or us. I promise. Emily took a few steps away, trying to process everything. It was hard to accept that, even after all this time, the shadow of the foster system still loomed over their lives. Richard stood as well, trying to calm her. I didn't know Emily. If I had, I would have done something. Now that I do, I'm trying to make it right. My father will have no more influence over me or us. I promise. Emily took a few steps away, trying to process everything. It was hard to accept that. Even after all this time, the shadow of the Foster family's control still loomed over their lives. After a few moments, she turned back to him, her expression softening slightly. I believe you didn't know Emily. That doesn't make this any easier. Protecting Noah has always been my priority. I can't let anything put him at risk. Richard nodded, understanding the weight of Emily's responsibility. That's why I'm here. Emily. I want to help protect Noah. I don't want to be a risk to him or to you. I want to be a support. She studied him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, despite everything. There was something about Richard that made her believe he truly was trying to change. Very well. Richard. She said finally, that we'll start fresh. With one condition. Condition. Anything involving Noah or our relationship must be based on honesty. No more secrets. Richard extended his hand, sealing the agreement. I promise. In the days that followed, Emily and Richard worked together to establish a more stable routine. Richard took on a more active role in Noah's life, from taking him to school to attending parent-teacher meetings. He was determined to be the present father Noah deserved. On the other hand, Emily began to notice that, despite the scars of the past, something new was growing between them. Richard showed a more sensitive and attentive side, traits she hadn't seen in him before. One afternoon, as they played in Emily's backyard, Noah asked a question that surprised them both. Mommy, can Richard live with us? Emily and Richard exchanged glances, surprised. Before Emily could respond, Richard knelt down beside the boy. That depends on your mom, Noah. What's important is that I'll always be here for you. Emily smiled gently, brushing her son's hair. Noah's innocent question made Emily think about their future together as a family. Later that evening, Emily sat on the balcony and looked at the stars. Richard joined her. They sat in silence for a while, until Richard stood as well, trying to calm her. I didn't know Emily. If I had, I would have done something. But now that I do, I'm trying to make it right. My father will have no more influence over me or us. I promise. Emily took a few steps away, trying to process everything. It was hard to accept that, even after all this time, the shadow of the foster home still loomed over us. Richard broke it. You know, Emily, when I think about everything that's happened, I realize that, despite the mistakes, we're lucky. We have a second chance. Something not everyone gets. Emily nodded her head in agreement, her gaze still fixed on the sky. And what are we going to do with this second chance? Richard asked her softly. Richard smiled. We're going to build something new together. No pressures. No manipulations. Just us. Emily finally turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. Then let's begin. This time without fear of facing whatever comes. With that promise, they both felt ready to face the future, confident that together they could overcome any obstacle. The months that followed were filled with moments of growing closeness between Richard and Emily. The trust that once seemed unreachable was slowly rebuilt through simple, meaningful gestures. Richard made it a point to be present for every important moment. Richard stood as well, trying to calm her, I didn't know Emily. If I had, I would have done something. But now that I do, I'm trying to make it right. My father will have no more influence over me or us. I promise. Emily took a few steps away, trying to process everything. It was hard to accept that. Even after all this time, the shadow of the foster home still loomed large over Noah's and Emily's lives. He spent afternoons helping Noah with school projects and evenings creating memories with Emily. Whether by cooking dinners or spending hours talking under the stars. One evening, while watching a movie together, Emily felt Richard's gentle touch on her hand. He looked at her with a calm smile, his eyes reflecting something deeper. "Emily, do you know what inspires me most about you?" he asked. His voice soft and full of affection. "What?" she replied, smiling curiously. "Your strength. Even after everything we've been through, you've never stopped being the incredible woman I first met. It makes me want to be better every day." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest. It was rare for Richard to express his emotions so openly. Each word seemed to melt the last of the barriers between them. "You surprise me every day, Richard. I think deep down, I always knew there was more to you, something beyond the man weighed down by his family's expectations," she said, gently touching his face. The two leaned closer. Richard kissed her softly. A kiss that carried promises of a future they were both ready to build together. A few weeks later, Richard decided it was time to. Richard wanted to show Emily how much she meant to him and how committed he was to their future. He decided to take the next step. With Noah's help, who was thrilled to be part of the plan, Richard began organizing an unforgettable surprise. On a clear spring evening, Richard took Emily to a secluded countryside property. When they arrived, she was enchanted to see a small pavilion adorned with soft lights. Rose petals scattered across the floor. A delicately set dining table. "Richard, what is all this?" she asked, surprised, as he guided her to the table. "Just a special evening for the most special woman in my life." He replied, smiling. During dinner, they laughed, talked, reminisced about the past. At the end of the meal, Richard stood up, took Emily's hand, led her to the middle of the room. He knelt down and took out a small velvet box from his pocket. "Emily Carter, you are the love of my life. The woman who taught me the true meaning of family, strength, redemption. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Emily was speechless, tears streaming down her face as she nodded repeatedly. "Yes, Richard. I will," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Richard slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a tight embrace. Noah, who had been watching from a hiding spot, ran out and shouted, "I knew Mommy would say yes." The three of them laughed together. In that moment everything felt perfect. Months later, Richard and Emily married in a breathtaking ceremony. The ring on her finger and embraced her. Noah, who had been watching from a hiding spot, ran out and shouted, "I knew Mommy would say yes." The three of them laughed together. In that moment, everything felt perfect. Months later, Richard and Emily got married in a garden ceremony with friends and family. Emily wore an elegant lace gown. Noah, in a tiny suit, carried the rings with a beaming smile. As Emily walked toward him, Richard felt grateful. She was his anchor. His partner. Now his wife. When they exchanged vows, both spoke. They put the ring on her finger and hugged. Noah, who had been watching from a hiding spot, ran out and shouted, "I knew Mommy would say yes." The three of them laughed together. In that moment, everything felt perfect. Months later, Richard and Emily got married in a beautiful ceremony. They promised to support and love one another through all of life's moments. The reception was filled with joy, laughter, dancing. Richard surprised Emily with a song he had personally chosen, leading her to the center of the dance floor as everyone watched with admiration. "I've always dreamed of having this moment with you," he whispered as they danced. Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Now it's ours forever." A few days after the wedding, Emily began noticing small changes in her body. She felt constantly tired and nauseous. She decided to visit her doctor. What she discovered? She put the ring on her finger and stood up, pulling her into a tight embrace. Noah, who had been watching from a hiding spot, ran out and shouted, "I knew Mommy would say yes." The three of them laughed together. In that moment, everything felt perfect. Months later, Richard and Emily got married in a breathtaking ceremony. It left her in shock and joy. She was pregnant. She planned to share the news with Richard in a special way. That evening, she prepared a simple dinner at home, leaving a note under his plate. When Richard opened it, he read the words, "Our love is growing. I'm pregnant." Richard looked at Emily, completely overwhelmed with emotion. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Emily nodded. He pulled her into a tight embrace, kissing her repeatedly. "I can't believe I'm going to be a dad again. This is amazing." Emily. Noah, who had been listening from the hallway, ran into the room. "Am I going?" he asked excitedly. "To have a little brother or sister?" "Yes. Sweetheart. You're going to be the best big brother in the world." Emily laughed and picked him up. 9 months later, Emily gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Lily. Richard was completely smitten as he held his daughter for the first time. Noah couldn't contain his excitement about meeting his baby sister. The days that followed were filled with pure love and joy. The house was alive with laughter. Richard and Emily felt they had finally found complete happiness. "Our family is complete now," Richard said, holding Lily in his arms. He put the ring on her finger and hugged her. Noah, who had been hiding, ran out and shouted, "I knew Mommy would say yes." The three of them laughed. Everything felt perfect. Months later, Richard and Emily got married in a beautiful ceremony. Richard was holding Emily's arm as he watched Noah play on the floor. Emily smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "Yes. It is. I couldn't be happier." With Noah and Lily by their side, Emily and Richard knew they had overcome every challenge and built something truly special. Do you think Emily made the right choice by forgiving Richard? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to catch all our stories. Check out more heartfelt stories by clicking here on the end screen.